Awesome. Good afternoon, everyone. So as Andrew said, my name is Josie Middleton, and I'm really delighted to moderate this panel on climate tech and sustainability. So we only have 50 minutes, but we're going to use them thoroughly to unpack how the African ecosystem is tackling this challenge by building sustainable businesses, putting in investment, and developing and deploying new technologies. Technologies, for example, that are ensuring the energy transition, sustainable food systems, clean transportation, and efficient buildings, to name a few. This subject is vast, and sadly, we're not going to be able to cover everything on it, but I hope it leaves you with food for thought and sparks even greater energy to tackle these issues. John Elkington, an economist and the pioneer of how we understand sustainability today, coined several key concepts in the mid-1990s, including the triple bottom line, which consists of the 3 Ps: people, planet, and profit. The notion being that businesses should think beyond immediate profit and take into account social and environmental issues too. To those familiar with the space, climate tech is neither new nor a trend, but rather an evolution from the clean technology, which I'll probably refer to as clean tech, solutions developed in the 2000s. Climate tech is defined as technologies that are focusing on reducing greenhouse gas emissions or those addressing the impacts of global warming, playing a vital role in helping us to adapt to the already underway climate change impacts. It's fair to say that climate technologies have gained popularity among investors in recent years. We are all aware that climate change is already happening. Temperatures are rising, droughts and wildfires are starting to occur more frequently, rainfall patterns are shifting, glaciers and snow are melting, and the global mean sea level is rising. As many research reports have long been saying, it is one of the greatest and most pressing issues today. But having said all those negative things, I'm very excited to have an experienced panel of investors, operators, and experts tackling one of the biggest challenges of our time. So we have, this is in no particular order of how you're sitting, but we've got, and if I say any names wrong, please correct me and forgive me. I'm very sorry for that. But Ambar van der Wath leads investor relations at the Baobab network, which is an accelerator that invests in early stage technology companies across Africa, particularly in pre-seed investments. Then we have Nsarkoh, who brings to our discussion immense operational and strategic experience from 3 decades working across the world for Unilever, in particular in Africa and Asia, where he became one of the company's most senior local leaders. Adetayo Bamiduro, who isn't here, actually. So hopefully he might join us, because I had some questions for him. But still, to give him some spotlight, he is pioneering a mobility company focused on sub-Saharan Africa, which is building mobility, financial services, and electric vehicle infrastructure for Africa's 100 billion transportation industry. They've also recently closed a 7.5 million funding raise round, backed, interestingly, by Yamaha, MasterCard, Novastar Ventures, and Breakthrough Ventures, representing the largest fundraise by a mobility company in sub-Saharan Africa. And last but not least, we've got Danny Smith here, who's the Africa Regional Director for Katapult, which is an impact venture company focused on highly scalable climate tech startups, with a leading model combining investment and acceleration for enabling success and doubling down on the best seed stage modules. Katapult's portfolio spans, it's huge, 146 portfolio startups, 34 of which are in Africa. They are in 47 different countries across 13 different funds with a grand total of 100 million AUM. And this is including 2 impact unicorns. In 2022, they launched a dedicated Africa investment and acceleration vertical, which I'm sure you're going to tell us about, so really looking forward to that. And sorry, double last but not least, we've got Christopher, I really can't count today, can I? Who is the founder and CTO of Aiponics of Harvest. You were correcting me on this yesterday. Are we going to refer to it as Harvest or Aiponics?
Harvest is good.
Okay, great. Which is a digital farmers market and they connect farmers directly to B2B and B2C consumers. They're trying to solve the global food insecurity issue by understanding market dynamics. Their aim is to improve the accessibility, variety, and quality of fresh produce farmed using environmentally sustainable methods, but with no chemical intervention and little to zero waste. So we're actually going to start with you, Chris. I'd love to hear, how is Harvest thinking about its role in the future of smart cities? And for the benefit of those of us who are new to the subject, could you define what you mean by smart cities as well?
Yeah, so smart cities are fundamentally cities that are planned out to be connected, planned out to actually, when you think about it, if you've heard of permaculture, permaculture is about building sustainable environmental practices as you grow, right? And so smart cities, I think, are sort of like adjacent to that, except on a much larger scale, building sustainable cities that are designed to take advantage of all of the interconnectedness, the internet, the IoT, to really optimize how a city operates, right? And so when we think about smart cities in the context of Harvest and our business, fundamentally, we look at how does a city take advantage of building systems that operate efficiently with their food supply as well. So not only just are our roads super efficient, is our traffic system super efficient, is our power grid super efficient, but also is our food delivery system efficient as well. And one of the things that Harvest does is, besides the marketplace, we have a two-phase solution. And the second part of that is really deploying a network of urban container farms to try and satisfy local demand with hyper-local supply, which means, can we build a network of containers that are deployed within these cities and within these areas that can satisfy sort of what naturally occurs as food deserts in cities, right? So the more urban you become, the harder it is to find fresh food sources directly within your sort of close geographic region. So how do you then start to build a smart city and plan a smart city that actually takes into account the food needs of that growing population as it urbanizes over time? And really, Harvest is focused on solving that problem from the B2C consumer perspective by localizing that supply capacity through a network of urban container farms that can grow local produce and feed that population as it grows.
Very important stuff, and we were starting to talk about this yesterday, but I'd love you to share your points with the rest of the room and to understand what support can governments be doing in order to ensure success, both in your company but in the wider sphere as well.
Yeah, and so again, going back to that smart cities concept, I think what you've traditionally seen is cities kind of grow haphazardly sometimes, right? And so different zones sprout out just as a result of private investment. I think as governments start to become more intentional in the way they think about cities, you start to see a much, much more efficient way of developing an ecosystem that's focused on food systems that can deliver to that population in a really healthy way, right? One of my favorite examples is actually in Malaysia. There's a city called Putrajaya, which is known as the most eco-friendly city in the world. And it's a planned city that was built by the Malaysian government, intentionally designed to be not necessarily, this was before smart cities were popular. They just were very intentional about designing the system to be able to be eco-friendly, have green spaces, have a really efficient transportation system. And I think there's a lot to learn from building in that same way and providing that regulation can actually allow those types of businesses to flourish, right? So right now, you take a city like New York, for example, a lot of zoning regulation that prevents things like urban farms to be built in those areas, right? So you have limitations based on zoning that can be a really limiting factor for startups like myself that want to go into areas like that. And then in the context of Africa, same type of thing, cities just kind of sprout up and grow. Lagos is a very, very large city, but is it well planned? And when you look at the traffic, you're like, no, not necessarily. Same with Nairobi. Lusaka, it was sort of like built on a swamp, right? And I'm from Zambia, so I say that knowing that I'll get a lot of flack from my fellow Zambians. But it was built on a swamp, and it wasn't very well planned. But if we're intentional about how we think about cities, how we think about agriculture as a key component to the way that cities grow, then you can be a lot more intentional as a government in the policies you build around it.
Brilliant. And in terms of the tech component, what tech infrastructure are you deploying in order to achieve that?
You know, I'm a big proponent of free internet. I think internet should be a public utility. And I think in order for innovation to thrive, you really have to look at ways that, as you look at interconnected cities, connectivity is really based on network availability. So how can we start to look at internet and access to internet as a public utility as opposed to, you know, a privatized industry that's for profit? And I think that's sort of the next boundary of revolution that needs to take place. Although we may be several years away from it, there's policies at the African Union level that are talking about more interconnectedness. And I would love to see a future where the internet is just free. Like you just get off the plane, you're on the continent, and you have access to whatever you need to have access to.
It's coming in a few cities, or at least in Nairobi Airport, it's free now. You'll be happy to know.
At least Nairobi.
Yeah. And interestingly, New York wasn't a few years ago, but I think it's changed. So thank you so much. And yeah, it'd be interesting to hear from you. It's quite a broad question, but what role does climate technology have in securing a fairer world?
Well, I think it's fundamental. It's central to all that you talk about. And the first thing is to say, what is the world? I asked somebody this question yesterday, and he looked at me very strangely because he said something about worldwide. And I said, what do you mean worldwide? If you put India, China, and Africa together, you have half of the world's population. If you put the whole of Europe together, if ChatGPT is right, I said yesterday, you have 747 million people. And you are giving me a very Eurocentric view, and you're calling it worldview. So the first thing is, what is the world? And technology is central to helping us understand what the world is. If I look in this room, we had a meeting the other day, and with people from all over the developing and emerging world, as they are called. So the host started by celebrating our diversity. And I said, what exactly do you mean when you say we are diverse? Yes, we may carry different passports, but can we check the number of universities that we attended? And I think the number came to 8 or something. Of the 20-something people in the room, we had all been to about 8 universities. So you're talking about different axes of segmenting society. There's class, there's gender. Someone was talking just before we sat down about dividing Nigeria into rural and urban, and I was saying to myself, that's not an easy thing to do because Lagos is simultaneously urban and rural. when you're in Ikoyi or VI, you go a little bit past 3 houses, you meet rural Nigeria. So technology is central for helping us to understand the world in which we live, how it operates, and where it will go. And there is a tendency for us to underestimate the transformational impact that technology has had. So I like to explain things by telling stories. And I say to people, until 1992, an SMS had not been sent in this world. Today, it's almost impossible to believe that. It feels as if right from creation day, we were sending SMSs. But until 1992, 3rd December specifically, an SMS had not been sent in this world. Today, as of 2022, 18.7 billion are sent a day. That is the degree of compression and the inventories of time and space that have happened in a short space. I'll tell the other story. If you read Len Scott's book, and if he's to be believed, on the Cuban Missile Crisis, which has become topical because of Ukraine, when the crisis was at red hot, the 2 most powerful men in the world, no doubt, in that construct of the world, Cold War, etc., Nikita Khrushchev and Jack Kennedy. And Nikita Khrushchev needed to get a written document to JF Kennedy. So they put 2 most powerful men, they need to get a secret document. The world's best technology would be deployed. It took 12 hours, and they celebrated both in the Kremlin and the White House, the speed of communication. Now, my wife sends me an email and we're having a video call and it doesn't come through in 10 seconds. I'm already grumbling and screaming, where's the email? You said you have sent it. That's how fast the world has changed. And with it, our capacity to understand each other, for barriers to drop, if we want to use it as a force for good. So to answer that question, it is central to human existence in the modern world. I know about the apocalyptic associations, I call them. Every time there's a new technology, it's going to end the world. This has happened since fire was discovered in the Stone Age. But we always hear. As I was walking here, I said, when the internet first emerged, it said books were going to disappear, but then more books have been sold over the internet than in physical stores altogether, and so on and so forth. So the simple answer is it is central. It is important that human society then steps back and says, how does it use it as a force for good? Because it's not technology that does good or bad. Technology is just a tool. It's how you deploy it that determines whether it becomes a force for good or bad.
Yes, completely agree. And I guess the other thing that you've pointed out is how technology needs an upgrade, and I'm sure any of us with an iOS phone, it happens quite frequently. Thank you for that. And another question I'd love you to answer is particularly feeding off of your knowledge as an industry leader at Unilever, is understanding what sort of instrumental frameworks or structures could be put in place. So you don't necessarily have to answer about ESG, but what sort of green innovations or structures and frameworks have you seen firsthand that, in particular in the African markets that you've been working on, have been enabling force for good to be happening at both the corporate level, but also the consumers in which the corporates have been serving?
I'm always making fun of management people, that they can't operate without frameworks, and that everything that happens, they feel is happening for the first time in this world. My grandmother was an illiterate peasant farmer who looked after her children and became educated, and that's why I'm where I am. And my grandmother knew about circular economics. She didn't call it that. She didn't call it ESG and so on and so forth. But when we talk about shifting rotation, she knew that legumes needed to be planted, and so she knew it and she understood it. And frankly, those are the principles of circular economics. If you go into the Native American cultures, I don't like the word native very much, but I can't find a substitute for it today, so pardon me. The indigenous American cultures, they had what they talked about, the 7th generation criteria, that if you were taking a decision, that would not hold. The logic of the decision would not hold across 7 generations, and it was probably the wrong decision. So I'm always, and you see this in all professions. I was saying to the coaching profession the other day, they said coaching and mentoring started in the 60s and 70s with neoliberalism and blah, blah, blah. And I said, what are you talking about? So in ancient Egypt, how do they train people to become kings? You say you started in the 70s, but you quote Socrates as a system for questioning. So you're asking the wrong person when you ask about specific framework. I say they all work, ESG, etc. They're commonsensical. The problem in this world is not another framework. The problem in this world is, do we stick to the fundamental principles that we know? And behind sustainability is a very simple cardinal principle. If everybody loves their neighbor as themselves, we live in a very fair society, because we all work for more liberty, for more egalitarianism. When I say egalitarianism, I don't mean that everybody's pocket carries the same amount of money, but you have equality of dignity, access to dignity, and for more fraternity. Again, I'm talking about French Revolution principles long before all of these things came up. So there are some management writers, Peter Drucker, Peter Pfeffer, Peter Senge, and others who rail against this tendency of management practice to get very excited about anything that is new. A lot of what we are shouting about and turning and somersaulting about are old principles that have been with the world. And what we need to do is to commit to them, of course, with a huge amount of curiosity, be willing to respect each other, live with a commitment to each other's dignity, and we'll find a way. I'm not particularly keen on saying this is the one silver bullet, this great free. I've seen so many work. Some call it ESG. These days, Oxford University talks about economics of mutuality, the sustainable principles. I was in China the last two weeks of April, They to call it something else. Deng Xiaoping said, we crossed the river by touching the stones. They were all talking about the same things at the end of the day. So you ask me, I say the greatest framework is common sense, fellow feeling. We want society to thrive for the long term and break away from the shackles of a society that, as the Chinese said to me when we were having a chat and I asked them about the lockdown that had happened for a year. And they said, we think in 50-year cycles. What is the big deal if we lose a year to secure 50 years? You come from a culture where you are bothered when the quarters numbers are not coming through, so you think that losing a year is the end of the world. But you cannot run a country or a society or a civilization by thinking about the quarter every time. So, long answer to your question, but it has enabled me cover a lot of ground about things that I'm very passionate about. And I don't even like the idea of us talking about a sustainability movement because it will pass. It's a fad. Something will come and another name and then another set of professors will come and they need to produce books so that they can be promoted and they'll call it something else and we get all excited about it. But what will remain true is that to survive on this one planet, we have to care for each other. If you believe that there is another planet that we can go to, okay, that is another debate I don't want to get into. But as I say to people all the time when they say to me, the world is now going to fall apart and there are wars in Ukraine and we haven't seen anything, I say, look, there's a basic principle on this earth. There's one planet. We have to find a way to survive on it. So we will go to push things to the edge, but eventually we will sit down and we will talk. And that's how the world has survived all these years.
Well, I love your positivity, the philosophical approach, and if I might add to it, I think one key element though of implementing frameworks, because I think my background is finance and particularly gender investment, and one of the ways to move the needle forward is to have data. So I think actually, even if it's slightly reinventing the same wheel that's been spinning since the Roman days, sometimes actually having new frameworks adopted, but crucially seeing going from a beginning point to hopefully a sign of progress is really key. And I think you've got some brilliant philosophical vision there. So thank you for sharing on that.
If I may quickly just respond to that, you probably will not find a person who is more data-led than I am. So I believe I'm an engineer at the end of the day, that's what. But I believe that you have to balance intuition and data. Data will lead you up to a certain point. That's what Deng Xiaoping meant when he says we'll cross the river by touching the stones. It helps you to know where you are going. And the point I was trying to make was that data is your servant. It should not become your master. That's the point I was trying to make.
Yes,
so yes, use it, get a framework, but don't become doctrinaire about any one framework, because the world is continuing to reveal itself.
And to be adaptable
Precisely.
is another thing. So thank you. It's very insightful. So I'd now like to move to the investors in our panel. So Africa's climate financing for adaptation and mitigation is generally publicly funded through a combination of grants, DFIs, national budgets. I see a few people I know from Kenya in the room who are also working at this from a corporate investor level too. But I think it is fair to say that there is a sharp contrast to the climate and investment environment in, dare I say it, the more economically advanced regions of Western Europe, the US, Canada, and so on. And these climate activities are primarily, in contrast, funded by private finance. So we will be addressing that. I think it's good to put sort of the elephant in the room there, and I hope you can give data points and even contest that thought as well. But starting with you, Danny, first of all, congratulations on your first year of having Katapult Africa. Very, very impressive achievement. And we'd love to understand from you what are the opportunities for the impact technologies that you've come across that are at the nexus of food and climate. And feel free to also use this time to talk us through a bit more about your fund and the size of it and how it came about.
Sure, thanks, Josie. Yeah, maybe just to start with the point about the balance between public and private as well, which also helps explain a little bit what we've been able to achieve in our first year and are kind of hoping to achieve as we scale up. So as Josie said, we launched Katapult Africa, so a dedicated investment vertical supporting impact climate tech startups in Africa last year. We're a Norwegian-based organisation, but our strategy here has been about building team, building capability, and we started off last year in Rwanda, building a team based in Kigali, and ran two programs, made 16 investments last year. And to the point about the blend between public and private, that's been an interesting observation lesson in our first year. We've been lucky to have some support from the Norwegian government in setting up and sort of adapting the model that's been developed for climate tech globally in Oslo and building our team on the continent. And through that, we've actually been able to also engage quite a lot with the Rwandan government, with a number of other governments as well, interested in not just tech and innovation, but actually climate as well. And that's also been through partnership with other organisations. In terms of the opportunities that we see, so our in starting off last year, a dedicated investment strategy. Before last year, Katapult had made 18 investments in companies, early stage impact tech companies operating on the continent. As we developed our strategy, we wanted to start with a relatively predefined sector. And our 16 investments last year were in technologies all around this nexus between food and climate. So all the way from technology supporting better production through to processing and some of the services supporting improved productivity and perhaps climate resilience, which we might come on to talk about as well. This year, what we're doing is sort of broadening out a little bit as well. We saw fantastic and still see fantastic opportunities in food and agriculture and technology supporting this, but want to look at, as we get to screen over 1,000 companies last year, we also saw fantastic opportunities in other, if you like, climate verticals. So mobility and technology supporting the deployment of renewable energy as well are some of the areas that we're seeing fantastic entrepreneurship opportunities in. And this, I think, the privilege that we have in building the team and network on the continent is being able to see these ideas coming from the bottom up. So in screening over 1,000 companies a year, we really get a super rich kind of variety of ideas. We look across, we invest across Africa. We've invested in 11 different countries so far. So it's super exciting to see these opportunities come from the bottom up in these different climate verticals, if you want to call them that.
And just a few other following questions from that. The 1,000 companies that you've screened, what sort of stage are they at? Is there a common trend of where they're at in terms of how much capital they're asking for, size of company, even the sectors that they're working on? Is it broadly spread? And if you can remember this fourth question, would love to understand what are the other organisations that you're either partnering with or doing co-investments with as well?
Yeah. So first question is the 1,000 companies. What sort of stage? So we're investing at an early stage, pre-seed, seed stage. We combine our investments with an accelerator program. So all of the companies that we invest in, slightly different to some accelerator models. We accelerate all of the companies that we invest in, and invest in all the companies that we accelerate as well. And so that's we look at companies with often a couple of years of operations, post revenue. Given the diversity of sectors that we're investing in, as well as I've said, we try not to sort of overbox ourselves in terms of in terms of looking at the same metrics across different sectors, apply a certain level of flexibility. And one of the great sort of learnings of the first year is seeing some diversity of stage of companies and seeing accelerator cohorts sort of exchange on different stages in terms of the different markets they're operating in as well. remind me on the second question.
Other organisations
that we're partnering with. So as I mentioned, we've been lucky to have some public support, not just from the Norwegian government, but also with the Rwandan government, setting up our team, investment sort of capability there as well. As many of you'll know, Rwanda very much positioning for that. And one of the great achievements was also having one of the Rwandan pension funds come into our first pilot fund as well last year. So starting to see a real diversity of different sort of prospective investors, partly being catalysed by this public funding. We also partner with organisations who, as we've developed a strategy and have to build the network, which is something that supports the founders that we invest in. We partner with organisations that such as the Tony Blair Institute for Global Change. We sit in Norsen House in Kigali. So we partner with companies, organisations that have networks across. And then finally, we very much part of our strategy is co-investing as well. So our team and we spend a lot of time speaking with other investors, and it's been super exciting to see even just in the year that we've been operating in a dedicated sense on the continent, how much excitement, how much engagement there is in climate tech. So a number of great co-investors that we work with, discuss as well.
And of those investments, are there any companies in particular, other than those on the panel, but are there any other companies that you've either looked at or you could give a great shout out to, and that you find, particularly from a technology perspective, they're doing something that is a bit more innovative, or perhaps taking something that's been around for so long, but they're just putting on a specific spin, which means that it can grow to scale?
You can shout out the ones.
No, so I mean, maybe just answer this we're kind of referring to the fact that we found that we want to define technology fairly broadly in this. We recognise that with climate at the core of our thesis, it isn't just software that's going to be the solution. So as we've spoken to so many amazing entrepreneurs, we've taken in and invested in both hardware and software companies, and also not necessarily always completely novel technologies, but actually companies deploying technology in innovative ways, using innovative business models that can improve basically access to better quality products and services for smallholders or contribute to climate mitigation. A couple of shout outs. I mean, we invested last year in our first cohort in a Ghanaian company called Complete Farmer. So they provide they're a digital marketplace, connecting smallholders with international market opportunities. They are just about to close what will hopefully be the biggest round in agtech in Africa this year so far. So that's been a real success. Desmond is an amazing entrepreneur, amazing founder, real kind of software example. A hardware or slightly more asset heavy example also actually in Ghana. We invested in a company called Legendary Foods, who Shabita has a background in insect protein, and this is a company that's setting up vertical farms to produce and cultivate palm larvae, so grown normally in oil palm in a very efficient, resource efficient way that can be both sort of consumed directly, but also has potential amazing uses, displacing more climate unfriendly proteins in consumer goods and products. So.
And from the startups that you've either worked with or been looking at, how much interoperability have you seen between the tech? So my background at GSMA meant that we did a lot of case studies, and we were always really intrigued to see, if we take an example of Phoenix International, which was a solar panel company which actually ended up selling to Engie. But in the case study, we found that whilst it was predominantly they were thinking they were providing power, one of the other things they were also providing was access to mobile payment services. through their company. So have you seen any others like that? Not only just M-Pesa, but have you seen any other sort of financial literacy skills go up, or education, or is there any other avenues that you've seen increasing as a result?
Yeah, and I think we heard on the panel this morning, I think there was a comment around there's a bit of a hype going on in climate tech, possibly, but I think for us it's about there are lots of different ways and lots of different types of technology deployed in different ways that can support climate resilience, defined as access and the outcomes of access to better products and services. So and specific to the point, there's other, I suppose, impact avenues that can be pursued whilst also having climate as a goal. So one example, a company we invested in November called Lucid Social. So they're providing software platform to link healthcare providers with the smallholder supply chains of some of the big consumer goods companies like Unilever, and their technology is software, but they're also achieving amazing health outcomes along with sort of climate resilience as well. So I don't know if that gets a bit to the.
That definitely does. I mean, that's a fantastic example. Thank you for sharing. Amber, you have joined the Baobab network relatively recently, and I'd love to understand from you the investing side, so the pre-seed angle, and what observations or themes have you noticed in particular that the startups in this space are focusing on?
Sure. Hi everyone. I guess just to give some intro and how we maybe differ to Katapult slightly. We're similar in the sense that we also accelerate all the founders that we invest in. So also investing at the early pre-seed stage. Although we're sector agnostic, our only mandate is that it's a tech-enabled solution by an African-born founder with the lived experience. And so, when looking at the sector, obviously, we're very intrigued, but at the same time, it's also competing with the other sectors at play. With that said, there's a lot of intersectionality happening, much like Danny mentioned, where the models that we're looking at are models that are trying to circumnavigate the kind of growth barriers presented to by all the infrastructure kind of constraints that exist around the continent. I'm sure Teo will speak more about that. I know as a South African, things such as load shedding, etc., and not having reliable power does make it a little bit trickier for startups at our stage to really kind of get going. But with that said, I think seeing a natural increase of applications and startups coming from regions that support climate tech the most. So Kenya, Nigeria, South Africa, Egypt, where either renewable energy is widely available, or where governments are also playing their part in supporting these innovations. And I think it speaks in the numbers in terms of fundraising, with a lot of climate techs attracting fundraising coming from Kenya, like Basi Go. I think what's also exciting to see, and speaking to kind of the corporate VCs at play, it's exciting to see investors such as Mobility 54 coming in and joining, because I think as venture capital investors, as I said, sector agnostic, we don't necessarily have the capabilities and scale from, say, an automotive point of view. I think one other thing to be mindful of in terms of climate tech, excitingly last year it was the second most funded sector after fintech. But with that in consideration, I think a good 23% of the deals was done through debt, which obviously also another topic, and I think it's been spoken about throughout the day. But I think that also just talks to the capital intensive nature of a lot of these solutions. But yeah, we're constantly on the lookout for those that are more asset light, and I think while it is important where the technology has come from, it's also equally important to understand, or to drive the ability and willingness of consumers on the African continent to access those solutions and to be able to pay for them as well, which speaks to, the embedded finance plays that come driving supply chain efficiencies and agri-tech, which can be asset light, which is exciting to see.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And just to say welcome, I'm glad you joined us and found us. Curious to know what scarf you're wearing. But yeah, thank you so much. I know we were a bit tucked away, so hard to find, so well done. Just a couple of questions for you, and congratulations on your recent raise as well. Could you explain to us some of the challenges that your company has experienced in deploying your model, and feel free to elaborate more on specific cities and what the contrasts have been. And we love data here, so please give us, if you can share, users or cost of using it, etc., and potentially even growth as well, so from when you started to now.
Sure. Let me start by apologizing once again. So I got my flight bookings and my train bookings as well, all mixed up. But I'm glad I could still spend some minutes with you guys. So I'm Nsarkoh, co-founder and CEO at Max. To answer Josie's question around our model, I'll explain that very quickly. So what Max does is pretty simple. We are a mobility company, right? Starting to transition gradually from ICE engines to electric motorcycles and three-wheelers. But still, historically, our fleet is dominated by ICE engines, for the obvious reason that charging stations and battery swap stations, sorting stations are still not at scale across much of sub-Saharan Africa, including the markets that we operate in. So today, Max operates in Nigeria, Cameroon, and Ghana. We operate in about 11 cities across those 3 countries. The product we provide is pretty simple. It's a vehicle subscription, right? So it's not necessarily a rent-to-own. It's also not necessarily a lease. So think of a gig driver who needs to use a motorcycle or a three-wheeler to move packages around the city or to transport themselves from point A to point B to do their own business. The challenge most of these guys have faced historically is they don't have the cash to buy that vehicle, right? The other option they have is to go rent from informal providers and local taxi groups and associations. When they take that option, it's pretty exorbitant and pretty expensive. So what Max has done is really innovated across the value chain to say, drivers need vehicles, right? Who has vehicles? OEMs and manufacturers have vehicles. So we entered into contracts with large global OEMs, including Yamaha, which also happens to be on our cap table, to convince them to put their own balance sheet at risk and say, hey guys, bring in all of these vehicles, we'll drive utilization for the vehicles and shift cash flows to you as those vehicles generate money. Then on the other hand, we work with the drivers to structure contracts with them, to run them through a screening process to make sure they are credit worthy, right? And it's a very simple, straightforward process. We capture your data, we get the guarantor details for you as well, and if you pass through that very simplified, streamlined process, then you'll get access to a vehicle worth anywhere between $1,000 and $3,000, right, with 0 down payment, which is really unheard of in all the markets that we operate in today. So you come in, and for a daily or a weekly subscription payment, you get access to the vehicle and a bunch of other bundled services. On the electric side of things, you also get access to one single free battery swap every day. We've run this for about a year in Accra now. So to your point around asset light versus asset heavy, because VC investors don't like their money going into hardware, generally speaking, right? We've run this model for about five years now. For the first 2 years, we actually did put some of our equity on the line to prove that the model actually did work, right? And then we replaced that with debt from local banks who were willing to take the risk and understood the model and felt convinced that we had significantly de-risked. And then shifted to complete off-balance sheet financing with manufacturers, right? So talking about numbers, as at the end of 2021, we had done cumulatively about 4,000 to 4,500 vehicles. When we introduced off-balance sheet financing with some of the OEM partners in middle 2022, that allowed us to scale and deploy about 14,000 new vehicles in 1 year, last year.
Good job.
And going forward, because the model is really working, right? Of course, I can get into the details of how we guarantee payments, on how we do recoveries and all of that. All of those are also fully automated processes. But I think what I want to focus on is the partnerships that have enabled the model to actually scale, right? Because if we had to go out on our own to raise, debt from traditional finance organizations. We could have done that, but that would take time. They don't really understand the model that well. They would price in risk into it, etc. But when you work with an OEM that understands the model really well, that also has skin in the game, because the vehicles they are deploying are manufactured by them, then there's a lot of alignment, right? And we're actually hoping to replicate this same model on the electrification side of things with battery manufacturers and EV manufacturers who can put their own huge balance sheets at risk to build that infrastructure, and then as cash flows are generated, you enter into some sort of revenue sharing or agreement that streamlines that or flows that cash back to them. But that's really the model that we've built, and we've seen it work really, really well. It's enabled by, of course, digital payments. A ton of our payments are facilitated by MoneyPoint, right?
Which digital payments?
So the way it works it works differently in different countries. In Ghana and Cameroon, where mobile money is pretty mature and pretty big, every customer has their mobile money wallet and they just make their payments, right, to a central account that you can trace those payments and reconcile them in real time. In Nigeria, initially, it was a little bit difficult because mobile money penetration in Nigeria wasn't high. It still isn't very high. But what is very high in Nigeria right now is agency banking, right? POS payment agents are all over the whole place. MoneyPoint, PalmPay, etc. They have literally hundreds of thousands of these people who are able to provide. They're really walking on human ATMs, as we call them. So what happens is a customer who's subscribed to a vehicle has a bank account, and they can walk up to any of those agents. Many of them will still collect cash payments from their customers who take rides or who do deliveries. But on a daily basis, these agents are accessible to them, and they can easily convert their cash payments into a digital wallet balance, and then Max just takes its auto debit from that. So innovations in fintech, OEMs willing to put their balance sheets at risk to support a new way of deploying vehicles, which is very different from what they've done historically. So if you look at companies like CFO and the rest of them, they pretty much don't provide credit, right, across the continent. It's cash and carry, right? You want to buy a vehicle, a motorcycle, whatever it is, you pay cash, you go, right? But the market, the people that really need these vehicles for the most part need financing, right, or some sort of embedded finance model to enable them to access. So talking about the market size, in Nigeria alone, there's about 10 to 11 million motorcycle and three-wheel taxi drivers across 36 states and the federal capital, right? And each of these guys would support an average of 5 to 6 persons in terms of the dependents that they have. So you have one industry that impacts roughly 50 to 60 million Nigerians, which is about a third of the population. It's really huge, right? But it isn't seen because I don't know, people don't pay attention. And a lot of these guys are also not necessarily in the heart of the commercial area. So you won't find them in the heart of Lagos or in the heart of Abuja or Port Harcourt, right?
So what I'm hearing, because
Yeah.
I have another question,
Yeah,
and
sure.
I also want to see if I don't think we have, I think we're needing to wrap up soon, is just to understand. So it seems like there's a sort of a waterfall impact.
Absolutely.
If we sum up in regards to the financial services that are being made through your e-mobility company.
Mm-hmm.
But one question I was particularly interested on was the manufacturing of the products.
Okay.
So if I understand correctly, you're making it locally. Is that?
Yes.
Which is a shift as opposed to
Yes.
maybe not going with Yamaha products, for example, or something like that.
Great. So as we're transitioning from ICE engines to electric, one consistent challenge we found with the global OEMs is the timelines to electrify is not very, very exciting. So Yamaha, for example, has a timeline of 2035 to fully build out the supply chain and the manufacturing process for the electric 2 and 3 wheelers, right? For some of the Indian manufacturers, the timelines are a little more compressed. But what we found over the last 3-4 years is none of them has really built out a really strong manufacturing and supply chain system to electrify their manufacturing, to produce electric R2 and 3 wheelers. So what we had to do, as we said, is to do that ourselves, right? Through a bunch of partnerships, contract manufacturing partnerships, component sourcing partnerships, etc., we were able to build the supply chain to be able to locally produce those electric 3-wheelers and 2-wheelers. So our 2-wheeler is called the Max M3. We took about 4 years of R&D to really get to a commercial grade, Africa-ready electric motorcycle that can, operate within the terrain and all of that on paved roads. But you're right, we just couldn't depend and rely on existing OEMs because the timelines are just way too aggressive. It's a little similar to, by no means am I comparing us to Tesla, but all the global OEMs did not take electric vehicle seriously until Tesla hit $1 trillion in valuation, right?
Well, thank you all so much. I could chat to you for hours, and I'm sure everyone in the room is really impressed with the work you're doing. So I just ask everyone to give them a round of applause for the work they're doing and in the future.